All right, y'all. Like I said, we got a busy day today. Got Jane George with me here. She is running for state Senate seat for District 6. This is number 3 of 4 today. I'm trying to squeeze a lot of stuff in here for the deadline of this August 6th primary. That is this Thursday, everybody. These are all releasing today on Monday the 3rd. So you got 2 more days to make a decision, and that third day you better get in there and vote. State Senate seat 6 is what the topic is today. For those of you keeping up, I had Sam Brown on earlier, which is the direct opponent in this primary, and we'll talk to Jane George and get her thoughts, opinions, and feelings on some similar things, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, Jane George. Hi, Jane.
Hi. How are you?
Doing good. So we started to talk a little bit there in pre-recording, and I just said, screw it, we'll do it in the show. We don't do format. We are blissfully aware of our ignorance. We like it that way. I think for me personally, this kind of all congealed around the idea that I don't know what's going on. I don't know who these people are. I don't know what these seats are specifically. You know, I'll drive down the road and you see 1,000 signs this time of year, and I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're running for me. I personally am right on city-county line, so I get a lot of city stuff and a lot of county stuff, and I'm in the county, and it's not clear whether they're city or county. Printed off the 5-page sample ballot, which includes all the districts that I'm not in, because, it's just a full sample for any possible combination of ballots. I'm a registered Republican. I've been so since I'm 18. If I'm honest, I'm not a Republican. I'm more of a libertarian, but I'm not going to register as an independent because that screws me on any primaries. At least as a Republican, I get some primary power, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so I won't get to vote for you or Sam as far as in this primary because I'm registered a Republican. I could register a Democrat to get it done, and then next time there's Republican stuff, I'm not going to be able to do it on that side. And so it's it's one of the issues that I have as a voter in general. I don't strongly identify with the 2 major parties, and the way the election commission treats an independent is even less options. And so I'm avoiding registering as an independent for that reason alone. At least I have some primary influence being registered as a Republican. So don't be scared. I'm not a real Republican. I'm not going to be mean to you. But that's kind of the premise of me. And so, like I said, we are aware of our ignorance, and that's intentional. Hopefully me asking stupid questions are questions that other people would ask if they had the opportunity, and will help clarify some things. So a lot of times a lot of people I've talked to so far, some of it's just process stuff. Some of it's not even about you as a constituent or as you as a candidate. Some of it's just about, how does it work to get on the ballot in the first place and stuff like that. I've already been through that enough, so we won't do that one again, but stuff like that, because I don't know. And I think a lot of people don't know. And I think that's one of the things that we as a constituency have gotten lazy at, which I will take credit for not doing my part to know better, but it's also way more complicated than most of us think it should be. And so to get started though, at least let's let you do you. Where are you from? What got you into politics? Is this the first thing you've ever done, or is this have you grown into this race or something like that? And is this the beginning of the future in politics, or is it you have a specific thing you're chasing?
Okay, it's a mouthful.
Yes, surprisingly, I talk slower on here than I do in real life.
Question, but it has 17 question marks in it.
Probably, yes.
No. I'm happy to answer this question. So I grew up here in Knoxville, and I was born at St. Mary's Hospital. And then my parents took me home to a little house over off Magnolia Avenue. And then when I was a few months old, we moved out west into the Rocky Hill community, which is now where my current practice is, where I'm sitting right now. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So you're not that far away physically from me. That's right. I told you, I tried to get you to close your office so I could put my business in it. That's what it was. We talked about that.
That's right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Let me try.
Rent my spa room.
Well, it's funny to me that the way the Rocky Hill Shopping Center is kind of sussed out. I love it over here. I love the Rocky Hill neighborhood. But anyway, sorry. I'm going to do this a lot, and I apologize ahead of time, but I don't at the same time because this is what I do. You moved out way west out here to Rocky Hill, and go.
Yeah, so we moved to Rocky Hill, and then I was very involved in sports as a kid. And so when I hit time for me to go to junior high, my parents gave us a choice. Do we want to go to Webb, or do we want to go to to Bearden? And I wanted to go to Bearden. I wanted to be in a place where they had good athletic teams. So, and then we moved over to a community that's just behind where Westtown Mall is now. And that's where I lived until I grew up and went to college. I went to UT. I started out at UT anyway. I was a Grace Moore Scholar, so I was a singer and an actor. Grace Moore specifically for opera. And then I started working and got into some acting unions and going on the road and ended up in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So I stayed in Los Angeles. I was there for a few years before I realized that that wasn't really what I wanted to be doing with my life. And I was much more interested in science and medicine specifically. So I got into UCLA and I studied biology and women's studies and had some great opportunities to do some crossover stuff. Did I just lose you?
I'm here.
Okay. You're gone from my screen.
I mean, I'm nothing spectacular to look at, so it's okay.
So it's just awkward to be talking to someone. I'll be able to see them.
Understood. I'm like, we talked about it before. I love doing them in person, but
yeah, I just will pretend like I'm on a phone so we don't have any body language going on.
Okay.
So I went back to school and I was pre-med and I got to do some really amazing stuff while I was there, work in some incredible labs and really study science in one of the top 25 science schools in the world. Okay. And decided not to go into medicine, but I decided to do a PhD instead in biology, and I got into their program, and then I did everything but actually submitting a dissertation when I realized I didn't really want to be a field biologist, which is, I'd done a lot of laboratory work, but I had focused my research out in the wild.
Right.
So I decided that was not going to be the life for me, and then I really wanted to be in a clinical environment again, and so that's when I decided to do a doctorate in chiropractic. So that's sort of the long and short of how, and then I moved back here after having a lifetime of amazing experiences. So I've done research on 3 different continents, all medical, scientific stuff, dealing with, in fact, one study I did, which was in London, we were looking at how income impacts the quality of a childbirth experience when you have a public and a privatized medical system. So I was looking at that back in 1991. I've been interested in that work for a long time. I did some work with working with the Zapotec Indians in Oaxaca and looking at their birth experiences. And then I did some work at Ecuador. So all over the place. It's been great. But anyway, it was time to come home and bring these experiences back to my hometown. So I feel like that was really the trajectory my life was taking me. I was ready to come back to Tennessee. I was ready to be surrounded by the trees and the rivers and the beautiful people here. So I came back. Now, in terms of answering the question about politics, how did I get here and why the Senate and all of that? So basically in my life, starting from when I was in 7th grade, when I was president of the class at Bearden Junior High, and then all the way through school, I was president of the student body in 9th grade and president of executive council as a senior and president of the class every other year. I was always involved in school politics, and predominantly because I was very interested in how we used the concept of representation, choosing someone to be a representative and a voice to be able to make decisions that would affect the whole. So from my senior year, I went in and restructured the student council with the permission of the administration. And instead of the classroom representative being arbitrary based on, these were the same people that have been doing it every year, we reconstructed it so that if you had 30 people that signed a petition to have you as a representative, that's what would happen. And so once a month, you met with a homeroom teacher who was assigned to your particular coalition of people. And then you had an opportunity to actually have some representation in student government. So it's been a part of who I've been since the time I was literally a kid. I continued to do a lot of political activism while living in California. I was one of the original Code Pink members. I was the first person on the federal lawn when we launched our first missile in Iraq. I was the only person there when the LAPD ran their tactical alert. I've been an advocate for women's health and reproductive rights. I've spoken at a NOW convention about that, which was back in my 20s. I attended after coming here, attended the Women's National March for the Women's Coalition in Washington, D.C. in January, the first one of those. And then started to meet people who were involved in political environment here in Knoxville. Last fall, I was starting to think about what I might become serious about in terms of running as a candidate. I've been thinking about it for a couple of years. And when I looked to see what were the options, I saw that the seat running against Becky Duncan Massey had been unopposed. And I started to look at her history, and I started to see that I would have done things quite differently than she did. And I started to look at the consequences of some of the decisions that she had made, and realized that this was a place where I could pivotally generate, I think, some real change in Tennessee for the better, I believe, of the majority of people that live here. And in looking at where people stand with some of the issues that I'm an advocate for, there's a majority of people, whether they're Republican or Democrats. Now, I haven't talked to a lot of libertarians. I have talked to a couple. I have had some great discussions with two come to mind. But there are a lot of things that we have in common, and a lot of concerns that we have in common. And in some ways, the structure that we have now is really a structure of extremists and old school politics,
right.
Looking at things, by symptom instead of by disease. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, that's one of the things for me. That's probably one of the reasons why, if I have to pick a party, I pick a libertarianism. I think this AB red blue format is not in most of our best interest. It's in the very, very small group of people that really, I mean, there are certainly people out there that are truly 110% Republican or 110% Democrat. But on the whole, like, my argument for the show at the most part is that I don't feel like I'm unique in the fact that I don't truly identify with either of these parties in the majority of their stances, or even half, or this, that, or the other. And so I'm a personal responsibility, personal freedom kind of person. I think that you make choices, you deal with the consequences of those choices, positive or negative. I don't feel like there should be, a bunch of interference from third parties on me acting in a day-to-day life. And that's some basic libertarianism in a nutshell. I do a terrible job of explaining it on the show, so I will not be the best representative of libertarianism ever. But
I'm fairly well educated about what a libertarian is.
I am as well. I just I always get lost in argument over stuff, because like a lot of stuff on libertarianism comes across really callous and cold, and it's not as much as it's that. It's just a very basic, simple logic, kind of thing. Because one of the things that I always get into, and it's a good argument to have. I don't know if we want to do it right now, but a libertarian believes in the right to discriminate by the individual, not by the government, but by the individual, in the sense that we do it naturally. We have our preferences of people we want to be with, people we want to hang around with. The idea of having a third party come in and say, you have to be my friend because I don't have enough female friends in my life, seems very foreign and inaccurate to me. And there's some stuff in the government that pushes that way, and those are things that, as a libertarian, I would push against. But that's not the point of why we're here. We're here to talk about you. So it seems to me, at least on the surface from your kind of self-bio there, that women's rights issues is a big one for you, and the way Tennessee treats that. How do you see that moving forward once you get this seat and you go and you get to sit in there and start bringing that issue to the forefront? Because it sounds to me like that, a lot of medical stuff for you, and right now is probably a good time for that with the pandemic. It's not a good time. It's poor wording. But as far as it's a hot issue right now, it's a big deal to a lot of people, healthcare in general, and specifically women's issues, as you mentioned. So how do you see that moving forward, given the chance to take this seat?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I want to explain how I see my job in the Senate.
Okay.
Because I think it'll help provide lenses that will make sense as we talk about issues specifically. So as I see it, there are three roles for a senator. One is you are actually legislating, so creating laws, passing laws. The second is to craft a budget, and then to approve a budget. And the third is to work specifically in the checks and balances system to hold the governor accountable. So anytime we talk about any of the issues that are affecting us, we want to make sure they're issues that are statewide issues, right, that can be dealt with at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also want to be sure that we're looking at it through those lenses, so that it's not about just sort of amorphic idealism, right? But actually being able to be specific about what we would like to see happen and know how we're going to fund it, and make sure that we are representative in what we're doing. Now, obviously, if you have a women's rights, reproductive rights issue, it's a very polarizing issue if you take people that are on the two extreme ends of it. And so there's no way to represent both of those people, right? You cannot diametrically, right. So I'm not ignorant to that, what I mean by saying that supporting most people, but we do have enough information to know that the majority of people in Tennessee are for women's rights, to be able to make those decisions about their bodies between themselves and their physicians, or themselves and their families with their physicians, however they define it.
Right.
I think that one of the things that's problematic about it is that it's particularly people that are opposed to it, who are willing to say, well, in the event of a situation where it compromises your physical health, then, we're okay with that. Well, guess what? I mean, we're not vessels. We have health well beyond our bodies. We have mental health, we have emotional health, we have financial health and intellectual health, and all of those things should be just as valuable as our bodies. And I think we need to start looking at women in that way, that we're not just carriers, right, of children. We have all these other realities that we have a right to make decisions about. And at the moment, the law certainly provides that we can make those decisions.
Right.
What's happening in Tennessee law right now with this fetal heartbeat ban is just absurd. I mean, it's so absurd that even the national organizations, Right to Life organizations, couldn't get behind it. Mm-hmm. And if you take it to its full extreme, it does not allow for someone who has been raped or through incest to make that decision. And it doesn't allow, if you are taken into child protective custody because your father was assaulting you sexually, you would not have that option. So you can imagine if we just logically follow that, what we would see is here is a woman, a young woman, not even of legal age. She's been taken away from her parents because her father was raping her. And now she's pregnant and she's going to be forced to carry that child. And her father's going to have child rights. He's going to be able to have access to that child as that child's father.
Right.
So it's
just plain gross. It's just, I mean, there's no other way to, like, yeah. I can't, and all you have to do is, I can't rationalize how any of that would make any sense to anybody. Take each individual thing. It's like, no, that doesn't make sense. No, that doesn't make sense. No, that doesn't make sense.
Right. And in fact, I can also tell you that at 6 weeks, there is no heart. There's literally no heart at 6 weeks. So this is just such an absurd bill. And the whole reason it's happening is because there's a group of people who want to be the ones who take something all the way to the Supreme Court and be able to rally-hoo, boo-hoo, yay, we won. We are the first state that it is illegal for women to have an abortion in, right? And that's what it's all about. So when people say we care about women or we're pro-life or we want, they're not. This is a big testosterone pool trying to say we want to win this case. Of course, there are women also lining up behind them, but there's no compassion in this, and it's certainly it's absurd. It's
right.
absurd.
And again, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say one of the other components that is in this bill is that a physician would be required to post in their office that if someone was doing taking the morning after pill, which is 2 different pills, and that they would be able to reverse after the first pill. And this has to be, the sign is supposed to be up in your office as a physician, and you can suffer a $10,000 fine if you don't have the sign up in your office. And here's the problem. It's a lie. You can't do it. They actually tried to do studies to see if you could stop one, if it was preventable. And they just had women hemorrhaging. They had to stop the studies.
Right.
So that's how absurd this is. This is how ridiculous it has gotten to this point. And of course, it was passed in the dark of the night, cloaked at 12:34 in the morning on a Friday night, Saturday morning. And, the woman that I want to replace, Becky Duncan Massey, was for it. She supports it. So there's no moderation in there. And looking at every level legislatively, it's already women have a right. So you would be trying to change precedent that's been established at the Supreme Court, right? Mm-hmm. There's that. Financially, it has no impact because we do not fund abortions. The state of Tennessee does not fund abortions, and the federal government doesn't fund abortions. And the fact that Governor Lee has been pushing for this, and the Senate is not holding him accountable for the absurdity of these laws. They're not innocuous, mind you. Whenever you have a situation where you bring something like this through the appellate courts, it costs money. It costs the taxpayers money. We have to pay for lawyers and filing fees and all those things. So it's not just an exercise. We're at a time where we don't have enough money for kids to get their school lunches. Then I can't believe we're spending money on this.
Right. I follow. And abortion is a fully hot issue all over the board, but the libertarian one's a specifically difficult one because it's it's the base level being like, well, it's not anybody else's decision but mine, not me, obviously, but the individual's decision. And that's how far the government should have access to is zero. It's my decision. Again, not me, but you know what I mean. And but then there's the non-aggression principle, which, depending on definitions, and that's where it gets weird. So I generally try to keep myself out of these. I don't have, number 1A is I don't have the ability to make this decision. It's not within my genetics to have to figure out how that would affect me because I can't. And so it is. I'm on the. I didn't. It grosses me out just as much what we're talking about as how it was done. And these are the things some of the things that bother me more than anything about our government on all levels is that 12:35 in the morning on a Saturday morning. I mean, nobody in Knoxville cares to be chasing that down and trying to watch that as it happens. And so it's that lack of accountability that bothers me the most. I really hope to, through this process, find people that understand that you're working for me. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of politics have fallen apart of. And me and my neighbor might not agree on everything. And part of your job is to kind of balance the two of us in a very simplistic view of what we're talking about. But at the end of the day, whether you take my neighbor's side or my side, you still got to answer to me on some level. And that's something I think that's missing in politics a lot. And I mean, I don't have a big opinion on Massey. I don't. My gut reaction is I hate the Dynasty family. I don't like the idea of a Clinton or a Bush, or in Knoxville it's the Duncans. And they've been around forever. And Jimmy finally retired because he couldn't handle the Trump mess, which I don't blame him for. But I got to meet him once, and he was a pretty straight up guy. But I don't. I intend to ask her to come on the show. Her interview is not as important given that she doesn't have a primary in 3 days. But I want to get her on and I want to talk to her. And this is something I'll add to my notes to talk to her about, because I agree. I feel like you're probably, obviously you're stating data, but it sounds to me like that's not something that we wanted as a populace, and it happened anyway. And, this is the first I've heard of it. And I'm trying to get more involved. I'm trying to keep up with all the different stuff going on, but there's a lot. And, had I heard about it before, I probably would have made a bigger fuss about it then. But, this is definitely something I'm going to have to dig more into, because that bothers me specifically a lot. Okay. So, let's shift off that topic. Do we want to stay in healthcare for a little bit? Talk about some of the.
We can talk about, let's talk about the Medicaid expansion program too.
Okay.
Because that's one of the things that I think when in talking to Becky, you might want to dig up a little bit into this too. So, Becky has voted for it. It's been on the floor a couple of times, and she's certainly voted for it. And when she was surrounded by what we call herd immunity in the Senate, it's easy to say yes when everybody else is going to say no.
Right.
And you can come home and say to your people, "Hey, but I said yes." Right. There's a big difference between saying yay and being a vocal advocate for something, getting up and actually dusting the Senate floor chambers with your very feet to fight for something and say, "Hey, this is really important, y'all. This is really important." And she sits on the health committee. So it's not been anything she's been a vocal advocate for or fought for, but she's raised her hand and said yes, and she feels that that's given enough public perception that she's for it.
Right.
I will say that basically what happened in back in March when the Senate was closing early because of COVID, of course, they could have at that time decided to embrace it, and they did not.
Mm-hmm.
When they met again in June, which was supposed to just be budgetary issues, it was brought to the health committee. And in that health committee, there are 7 people, and she's one of them. And then, of course, the guy who brought it, but it was a Democrat who brought it. And so because it was a Democrat who brought it, she did not motion it. She did not second it to move it on to the Senate floor at a time when we were in a pandemic. And there's just money out there, billions of dollars out there that we could have said yes to.
Right.
Now, someone who has a fiscal issue with it, the reality is that when Arkansas decided to do it in 2017, so there were years when they didn't and years when they did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when they decided to do it, they saved enough money in 2017 that they didn't have the state's part of it, because the state does throw in, right? The state's part of it was covered for not just that first year, but the second and the third year, just in the first year that they had it.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually is a fiscally responsible decision to take that money to help support working Tennesseans, particularly in this time.
Right.
You know, there's, I tend to think of things politically as big meshes, big weave of fabric and idea, where you can no longer look at the state of affairs by just taking one thing at a time, carving it up into symptoms, and keep throwing money at symptoms, because you can do that all day long. If you don't deal with the problem, you're just going to be throwing money at symptoms, and you're going to have create a lot of dissonance in the structure itself, because you're going to have people fighting over these little things. You know, it's like the kids fighting over the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I want it. Well, we can cut it in half and share it, right? So we can actually make decisions where things just make sense that are so obvious. But if they're just going to keep fighting over whether they should have it in that state and on that bread and all kinds of other details, then we fall apart. We get nothing done. Right. So I do think that when we're looking at things like Medicaid expansion, you know, we got to realize that we do not have a real living wage here in the state of Tennessee. It's based on the standard that was set in Washington in 2009 at $7.25. So people cannot live on that anymore. That's just not functional here. You cannot live on $7.25 an hour. However, some of those jobs belong to people that we consider non-essential, that we consider essential workers. They're people that we count on, right? So these people may not have a full-time job, because some of these big boxes, the way they're working with things is they're saying, we're only going to hire you for 31, not 32 hours, because we don't want to pay your insurance. Right. So you go get a second job, and you can have 2 jobs making $7.25 an hour, and you're going to have no benefits. And this is what it's going to look like, you know? So there's something wrong with that. And I think that there are a lot of decisions that have been made to maintain that labor force here in Tennessee. And I think it'd be amazing if we could get people to have a living wage so they could afford health care. So we don't necessarily have to be dependent. I do think that you can have a public and a private system. You don't have, it's not an either or. Right. So look, if you're doing great, your business is giving you health insurance and you don't have to pay for it. Those are the people that are fighting against the public system, because their office, they like what they've got, right? Okay, great. Keep what you have. Then let's create a public system for people who don't have. Right. And so and then let's see how it plays out.
For me, who is trying to get better and more well versed in this, because I absolutely agree with the problem end of that in that, you know, people can't afford to live, and that's a problem. I agree with the problem end of that, and the solution end of that. I don't know exactly how I sit on it, but I guess one of the assumptions I have because my insurance through my job is not great, and I don't particularly care to keep it or drop it. That's not important to me specifically. But one of the issues that I would assume is happening is one of the cost of healthcare. I think is a bigger issue than the insurance side of it. Does that make sense? And that's one of the things that I think to follow the logic, if you have private health insurance through your company and it's pretty solid, your premiums are going to go up, because I think the cost is going to go up with a public option of that size. So
then that's where you get into regulation, which you as a libertarian are going to be opposed to.
correct.
But here's the reality. If you want to keep it and you don't want it regulated, then this is a capitalistic structure. They can make it for as much as they want to. And if it gets out of reach for those people who want a private system, they're going to have to go into the public system. I mean, that's just how it's going to cave in, right? That's just the reality of it.
No, you're not wrong at all on that. But the concern would be, or I guess the alternate solution that I kind of tussle with is trying to go the other way for healthcare to operate more truly like private industry, as opposed to this kind of collaboration that they have in place, or collusion is probably a better word, which I believe is part of the reason the cost of healthcare is so much. I think we could do better to figure out how to have real competition between doctors and hospitals, so that we don't have these skyrocketing bills that either you have to pay a ton of premium for an insurance for, or you have to pay an obnoxiously large number when you're trying to pay out of pocket because you're uninsured.
So how are you going to create that without regulation?
That is something I need to dig more into. I tried to lead with it's like you said, it's a base ideal, and how to get there is the question. And I truly don't know, but I firmly believe that that there's some perverse incentives in place in the healthcare system that is not in the customer's best interest. If we're going to stay on the capitalist thing, which I tend to, I believe that capitalism works in most things. I'm sure there are exceptions, and healthcare may be one of those exceptions. I don't have the knowledge base to say whether it is or isn't, but I feel like at least as of late, the only solution that anybody has is to go more public instead of more private. And I don't know, to be fully fair and transparent about it, I don't know that more private would be the better option. But that's the way I tend to lean, because I think it makes more sense to me as a business person, as a person who goes out and deals with the public and understands what it takes to try to keep a customer. It's important. There's a lot of different things you got to do to keep a customer, and not all of that's just price. It's performance and all the different parts and pieces of it. And I think that the healthcare industry specifically lacks that need to compete. And I think that is part of, and again, using, kind of jumping out for a second, using a lot of the guaranteed student loan programs and stuff like that, and what that did to the price of college, it's hard for me not to project that same ideal that would happen into healthcare if we had a system theoretically similar to the student loans situation gets injected into the healthcare system. I feel like the price is going to skyrocket across the board. And whether that eventually turns into a fully public healthcare only option because no private companies continue because no customers can afford it. And then what that does long term is kind of my fear in that conversation. And I try to be open about it, but that's where my brain goes.
Yeah, I can help, I think, a little bit in clarity. If a hospital charges $69 for a Tylenol, because the insurance company will pay that because there's agreed prices for things. Mm-hmm. If insurance statisticians are deciding whether or not a procedure is acceptable, whether a young woman who has a lump in her breast at 29 years of age should actually get a mammogram and they'll pay for it or not, because statistically the choice is to let her die because maybe she doesn't, maybe she does. But if she does, it's still going to be cheaper for the insurance companies. So I think there's a big difference when you're talking about market and creating market for things that are not life or death. Like if you're talking about who makes the best down jacket, and then those people who make down jackets regulating each other simply through cost and cost analysis and how many do we have to sell and all the stuff that we look at through the economy or through the economics of making down jackets. But when we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about life and death. We're talking about, and there was a time in my lifetime where I had health insurance and we had a family deductible of $500 and everybody needed to go to the doctor, went to the doctor. It was just never a problem.
Right.
And what has happened in a lot, personally, I believe a lot of it has happened because of deregulation, where they said you can do whatever you want. And you've got organizations like, I'm not going to get into that. You've got organizations that are all in bed together,
right,
that are making deals with each other, putting butter on each other's bread, and they're and the person that's left out of all of this is the thing that's getting consumed, and that's you and me.
Right. I don't disagree with the analysis situation.
Our ability to access healthcare. So you either have to highly regulate what you're doing in the public system, or if you're not going to regulate what you're doing in the public system, you have to provide a public system. because there's too much insider trading, so to speak, going on in our healthcare system to be able to say, oh, it'll just organically take care of itself, because it's not. It's spinning out of control right now. That's why so many people don't have health insurance. It used to be not an issue.
Right. I mean, like I said, I get it through work, and I barely call it having health insurance. It's enough for me.
I know, right?
You know,
I know, and it used to
it's
not
enough
be
for me
like
not
that,
to use it. I don't remember what I pay annually, but other than my annual physical, and my wife gets it, and her annual and her PAPs and all those kind of things. Other than the basic, and I think another one, and I think some of the healthcare is coming around to it, is preventive maintenance, for lack of a better word, where, that's something that I think has been failing and has gotten better, because I think insurance companies are starting to figure out if we do things to keep you from getting sick, we don't have to pay as much when you do. I think that's a big positive that I've seen happening and could do better at. I know my mom said that her last insurance before she retired, I don't remember how it all worked out, that they started paying for her gym membership. They're like, hey, go and do it. Stay healthier. And that's good stuff.
Guess what? Guess who's doing that? It's through her Medicaid, I betcha. Did she just go on Medicaid? She just turned 65?
She's past that, but this was.
That's where it's coming through. So through the Medicaid programs now, they're actually paying for gym membership for seniors. So that's a government program, believe it or not. There's, our private systems may or may not be jumping at that. I don't really know, but I know that is happening for people who have Medicaid. And I'm a functional medicine doctor. That's what I do for a living. And so it's all about preventable stuff, or preventive care. And insurance doesn't pay for people to come and see me. So people have to pay out of their pocket, but I'm still a physician, and I still went to school for 4 years, and I still have big loans, just like a medical doctor. So I still need to get paid for the work that I'm doing, right? And the insurance companies don't cover it. So only people that have access to it are those that have money coming out, can pay for it privately out of their pockets.
Right.
So I get the problem. It's that only preventative care is going to be accessible to people who can afford it. There's something wrong with that.
I agree with that for sure, 100%.
Yeah. Yuck. Okay. So anyway, Medicaid expansion is an important thing. It's a great fiscal decision. It's going to help us to take care of a lot of working people. Now, we had over 600,000 people that didn't have health care as we went into this, Tennesseans, as we went into this pandemic. And then through the pandemic, over 270,000 have lost jobs. And with those jobs, have lost insurance. So we're close to 1 million Tennesseans right now who don't have insurance. Now, not only does Medicaid expansion take care of those people, dad, grandpa's heart attack, grandma's stroke, like those things are real issues in rural Tennessee, which is over 60% of Tennessee is rural. We have hospitals shutting down all across Tennessee. And why? Because they're not making profit. Why? They've been bought out by profitable healthcare companies. And when they didn't make profit, they just shut them down. Again, we're talking about life and death. We're not talking about down jackets. So when you shut down a hospital because it's not profitable out in the countryside, and the closest hospital is, let's say, in Knoxville, is University of Tennessee's hospital, then you might have to drive an hour to get to the hospital. Well, a lot of people won't survive that long. So,
right.
And then when they do, and they get here and they take an ICU bed, we now have it in our backyard as our cases are starting to go up with our hospitalizations, or specifically for COVID-19, overlapping on those that we already have in ICU beds, right?
A friend of mine
works. Now we have people coming in that don't have access because their hospitals are gone because they didn't make enough money. So this is where that profit thing, when you get into healthcare, is a real issue. I think and that's happening now. I mean, we have that happening now. So the Medicaid expansion also helps us to get some of those hospitals reopened. And when we have those hospitals, we provide jobs, right? We're talking about the average small regional hospitals, 150 jobs. So those are jobs for nurses and doctors and x-ray techs. And so
right.
you
well-paid
have
jobs.
Yeah. And when those people leave, you got a brain drain from those communities too, right?
Right.
So we have all around the state of Tennessee, we have some real crises happening, and we're just at the beginning of it. And so Medicaid expansion helps us with that too. It gives us money to try to get people back into those communities and working in those hospitals. So it serves a lot of purposes. And for people who need GAP, who have lost their jobs now, don't have insurance,
right.
could have access. And, yeah.
I've always found it curious, the idea that insurance is stuck to your job. So it's like,
I know,
it's
it
like,
should not be.
I enjoy my job. I like my work. had a rough little. It's been a rough patch going through all this because I never stopped. I had to work through this whole thing, and I actually got busier. I got more work because of what was going on, because half of my industry got shut down, and so the other half all piled onto me, and so I've been busier for it, and so I was getting burned out a little bit there. But the idea that for me, even part of the reason why I don't want to leave this job is I don't want to lose what little health insurance I have, and it's like that's again, it just doesn't make sense to me
does
that.
it make you feel corporate owned? Like, should we be that corporate owned? Like, when we talk about independence and we want to be able to go out and start a small business, well, most of us, when we start a small business, don't have a whole bunch of money sitting in the bank. We got enough to get ourselves started, right? And so we should be able to have access to healthcare insurance, as we are creating jobs by starting small businesses, and not force everybody to be dependent through a corporation for their paycheck, for their healthcare, for their pensions. Like, those are the things I like about libertarians when they're thinking about, now I want to be in charge of my own life here, right?
Right, and when you get in, I also own a small business with a buddy of mine, and we want to provide for, but we're doing the math on and trying to figure it all out, and we're small enough where we don't have an obligation to yet. But like, as far as regulations, I'm wholly opposed to, is that, like, I can't remember what the number is, but once I hit a certain number of employees, I have to provide. And it's like, that changes my potentially, not reality, but my $7.25 an hour employee now becomes a $12.50, $13, $14 an hour employee, almost doubles what I have to pay for them to be an employee. And that changes my decision process, because I have to insure them. And I'm curious to know, I'd be curious, not that you necessarily know this, but like, how did it get to the point where you couldn't buy your own insurance separate from your job? Because you can, but you can't,
So here's the reality. When you just postulate and give me your specific experience, if we had a public healthcare system, that would not be on your back.
I agree.
That would not be on your back. So you're talking about a capitalistic structure that imposes that on you, right? If we had a system where people had access to healthcare, you wouldn't have that responsibility. Well, who do you take the onus off of when you get into a position where you have that many employees and all of a sudden you have to start paying for it?
See
where I'm going with this? Like, so that means that those individuals no longer have to provide their own insurance, right?
Right.
Which would be, for some of them, potentially, but might be on the Tennessee marketplace. If you're only paying them $7.25 an hour, they probably are on the Tennessee marketplace. They probably don't make enough money to go just buy regular insurance. Nobody can live on that.
Right, that's my point is, though, is there's
provide their own insurance.
There doesn't really seem to be that option, and I'm curious where.
That's what the public system's about. Okay. It's like, so yeah, okay, but yeah, it is a solution to a lot of the problems that you brought up.
Okay, I mean, again, I'm not trying to speak against it. I don't necessarily have a full opposition to it. But like I said, like, some of my gut reactions to are cost issues and stuff like that. So, I mean, that is certainly not a single issue. I'm not a single issue voter on that one for sure. I mean, in fairness, I don't get to vote for you at least until November anyway. So, you're not going to break or buy me on that one. But I think it is a huge issue. It is a huge thing that needs to get looked into. And realistically, despite my libertarianism, this doesn't work. Now doesn't work. And so to continue to try to tweak and twist now, it's this thing just doesn't work. So let's quit pretending like we might figure out how to make it work, and let's try something different. Maybe that doesn't work, and then I can pitch my version, and we'll see what goes from there. So for me, I got 2 kids over here at Rocky Hill, 100 yards from your office. And we're going back to school. We made the decision that that's what's right for us. I feel comfortable with it. I'm not super happy about it. And so schools always seems to come up with everybody I talk to. So, I mean, where are you at with the whole school thing? Because, I mean, realistically, it's just money for state Senate seat, right? You're not going to have a lot of direct impact on any policy changes or anything like that. Or am I misunderstanding the position?
Yeah, that's a great lead, because you're right. We are limited in terms of what we can do, but certainly governors have been saying that we're not going to reopen our schools, and that's at the General Assembly level. And again, when we go back to the 3 ways that how a senator shows up, one of them is holding a governor accountable. And so when a governor says, let's go back to school when we're in the middle of a surge and we don't have enough in the budget to actually protect children, then that's where a senator should stand up and be saying, stop. We have to either, number one, maybe find more money in order to make smaller class sizes so we can hire more teachers and we'll take over more public spaces in order to teach our children. Also for personal protective equipment that we're going to need for our staff, for our teachers, for our administrators, for our janitors, for our cafeteria workers. So all of these jobs, it's going to cost money to keep all these people safe, and certainly the children. It's not like you can just take last year's budget. Now, last year's budget's already problematic because the system that we use to figure out how to fund our schools is broken and it's antiquated. It was developed in the 90s. And so we really don't have a good way of figuring out and projecting what we need in our schools. So when they say now in the Senate says, well, we have fully funded schools, what they're saying is we met the requirements from this algorithm that was established in the 90s.
Right. We think we're going to collect enough. We think we're going to collect enough taxes.
I have this beautiful dress. I wore it when John Travolta was doing Saturday Night. It's like, it's not really beautiful anymore, Jane.
Right. I mean, yeah, because we've had a couple discussions with some other people and stuff like that. And one of the other guys on the show, he likes to talk about a lot. He's like, Knox County Schools should have a ton of extra money. And it's like, well, they don't because they didn't actually collect it in the first place. Their budget is based on what they think they're going to collect the month before they need it next year. And that's...
but the system is worse than that. I mean, it's not that they're retracting money, which they are, by the way. But it's that there's not enough money even established to begin with. So the way that it happens at the state level is there's a certain budget, and then that money gets given out and distributed to the counties.
Right.
And then at the county level, they determine what they're going to do and how much they're going to throw in, right, of their budget in to match that budget to actually generate what the schools actually see.
Right.
And, in this situation with the schools, this is where I find something very disheartening. We get back to the whole Senate level. There was an opportunity when right before they broke in March because of COVID, they started cutting the budget. They said they weren't going to give the teachers the 4% raise they were supposed to. They're supposed to give them a 2%. They have not had an actual raise in over 2000 since 2000. They've given them raises, but the money's never made it into their paychecks. Right? It's gone into administrative costs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they were told a 4%. Then they cut it down to 2% in March. And then when they came back to finalize the budget, they cut $70 million additional dollars out of the school budget. They said, we're not going to give the teachers any raise. And it was a Democrat put out and said, here is a bill that we should pass that will give $150 million. This is an emergency fund just for the schools as they go back into the fall. And we, discretionary, we'll figure out how it needs to be spent. We need to put money aside to help the schools. And once again, Becky Duncan Massey, she voted against it. And in fact, all the Republican senators did simply because it came from a Democrat. This is where we're talking about old politics where nobody's really thinking about how is this going to affect your kids, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's, again, I get the joy of being the third party advocate anyway, so I don't care which one does it. As long as it's a good idea, let's get to work. I mean, I don't care, it doesn't matter who wrote it. If it's the right thing to do, it needs to be done. And that's one of the really frustrating things to watch in politics, especially. And I mean, I've seen it from some of the local people too, specifically. Like one of the things that I've kind of got on this kind of idea, like I threw it out accidentally, like it just came to me one day and I threw it out at one of the guys I was talking to once about like Knoxville needs to go metro to me. I think Knoxville is already, everybody agrees, everybody that I've talked to and brought it up with agrees that it is an eventuality. And not like a 50-year eventuality, like a 10, 15-year eventuality. And it's like, well, then what are we waiting on? It's going to save a little bit of money. It may not save as much as I assume it will, but it's going to save some money. We can take that same money and pump it into the schools, pump it into other places that it's needed, something like that. If it just takes one mayor off the docket, that's a good bit of money we can put somewhere else. Probably the mayor's salary is probably 2 or 3 teachers, something like that. And so, that kind of thing to me, and talking about the partisan politics of the thing is like some of the people I talk to is basically like, well, if Kincaid would be the mayor, then I'd be good with it. But if it's Jacobs, I hate it. And it's like, well, no, stop. This is me. Is this better for me? Not for you and your party. Is this better for me as a constituent? And maybe it takes a few terms for things to settle down and be a little bit more unified as far as what we are as a county. But to say no to it just because you don't like the mayor that will probably sit on top of it immediately because they're the other party, that right there just completely turns me off the conversation. It's like, stop. It's about me, and not to be selfish here, but that's why I started this podcast. That's why I started reaching out to politicians like you, is that I'm trying to figure out who you are, what you're doing, what the job is, all these different things, because it's supposed to be about me, and I need to put forth better effort into tracking things, but it's supposed to be about me and my neighbors and our community. And I think it's gone too long that too many politicians are out there about themselves, not about the people they represent anymore. And, it's one of the really, really frustrating things to me. And I love hearing stuff like that from most of the people I've talked to, because honestly, most people I've talked to so far this is their first run at it. I've only had a couple people in that are either incumbents or are changing to a different position in government or running for a different position in government. And so I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see, I don't know how old you are. I won't ask. My mom taught me never to ask a lady how old she is, but at least with the people I've talked to, the average age is down. I mean, the average age seems to be down. We've got younger people wanting to get into this and wanting to be a part of it. And I'm excited about that, and whether they win or lose, the movement has started. People are more interested and they're paying attention, and that's important. And I want to be part of that. I want to be part of what helps get voices out. I don't care what the voice is. If the voice is going to be the voice that does for themselves, then that's fine. And I'm going to illustrate it as such. If I don't know, I haven't talked to her yet, but if I can get Becky on here and talk to me and it's clear to me that she talks like that, it'd be like, well, when are you going to start voting on my behalf? And I'll call her out on it if that's the truth, because I don't think, especially locally, we get enough coverage. And what coverage we do gets really stale and boring, and nobody really pays attention. And
that's the reality with state politics in general. People tend to be more aware of what's happening locally and nationally. And as the federal government is deconstructing right now and has been for the last 3.5 years, as it's deconstructing, power's coming back to the states.
And I like it.
So there's never been a more important time to make sure that the people at the state level are competent and they're no longer there for a popularity contest or because their daddy was somebody,
right.
But this is the time where we need to have really thinkers in there. I can tell you from my training as a scientist, that bleeds over into every aspect of my life, which means that let's find a solution and then let's test the solution. Let's figure out if it's the best solution. If it's not, we find a different solution, right?
Right.
And one of the things that's beautiful about science is it's all peer related. So whenever you do something, then you go to your peers and they see if they can reconstruct it or if they think it's a good idea or did you use the right model? You're held accountable, right?
Right.
And so this is the way that I think in general, and this is why I think I would be really good at the Senate level specifically. This is one of the things I can bring to that floor. Look, I can help you. I can look at things in a different way. I'm here to work with you. I want to work with you. I think it's really important that we try to find ways to work together. I think there's a lot of common ground issues. When you're talking about too many chemicals in the drinking water, it doesn't really matter what the letter is behind your name. Your grandbaby and your neighbor's grandbaby are drinking it. You guys might be an R and a D, but both of those kids are going to be impacted by that. And do you want that to be picked up by the farmer? Do you think the farmer should be cleaning up after their waste? Or do you think the taxpayer should be? Because right now the taxpayer is.
Right.
And if you want to talk about let's not regulate the farmer, okay, well then why do we as the taxpayer and why do our children have to deal with whatever industrial waste comes off of there because we're not going to regulate the farmer or not just farmer, let's not say farmers, let's say industry. So if we're not going to regulate industry because we don't want to regulate, then that means that we're going to have a lot of kids that are going to get sick for all kinds of different reasons. So we have to start looking at, and I think one of the ways to get to this, to be honest with you, is we have to look at industry and attracting industry into Tennessee that's actually going to make Tennessee a safer and better place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one way to look at our economic development is how do we bring in, if we're going to bring in these big box like Yahoo or a Google into having a satellite headquarters in East Tennessee, that one of the things they look at is how much sustainable resources do you use? They actually want to know that. And it can be anywhere from 20 to 40% can be the standard. They want to know how good are your schools? Well, right now we're 48th in how much we spend per pupil. And we have kids that are not doing too well in general. We, in terms of going to college, in terms of standardized reading issues.
So to interrupt real quick, if we're 48th in expenditure, is that does it correlate very, very clearly with spend to quality of outcome?
It does to the extent that, and it's in some ways it's a very amorphic way to look at it, because if we have better teacher retention, if we have the ability to attract strong teachers, if we have the ability to bring in new ways of modeling in our classrooms, if we can afford assistance in our classrooms, we can afford higher quality equipment in our schools. These are kinds of things that all have an impact through how much we spend per child in our schools, right?
Right.
So this is not just here's your money, this is for your lunches and your books, right? It's being spent in a lot of other ways.
Right,
And
I get
we
that.
have
I'm just saying, but
yeah.
is there correlative data that says the more we spend, the better outcomes we have?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It
I mean,
depends
again,
on
I respect
and
and
I'm
agree
telling you
that
the
it's not
truth.
all spent on one specific kid, or it's not specifically how much we can trace back to one kid, because there's obviously some schools and some kids that have more spent on them for one reason or another than others. I get that part. I just again, it's just a curiosity more than anything.
So we can look at bigger models. So if you look at LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District. So they're like here, schools are funded in part when you get back to the county level through property taxes. So when you get into communities where homes are not, do not have values that are anywhere competitive, it could be a whole order of magnitude difference between a home in one part of Los Angeles and a home in another part, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there's a lot more money to spend on the school that has the higher property values. So suffice it to say that, having a one-room schoolhouse from first grade to 12th grade with 3 teachers, because that's all you can afford, compared to a big master campus, you can see that you're going to have a tremendously different outcomes just based on what resources you have available to teach those kids.
Right.
And so we have that. That's also real here in Tennessee, and it is relevant. So we know that kids that are sitting in classrooms and you've got 40 kids sitting on the floor instead of 28 in desks, kids that are getting hand-me-down science books compared to the kids that have the most recent books. Like we see that disparity, and we see it along lines of people of color as well, color communities with people of color. So we do need to find ways to make sure that we have an accurate way to understand what schools need in terms of funding, and how we're going to provide that in an equitable way is important. And we want to obviously trace the money. I mean, we want to know, are we going to get results if we do this?
Right.
But we certainly do see some compromises.
Okay.
As a consequence of our lack of funding.
Right, because one of the things to me, and one of the genesis things for this show and this part of the show specifically, is that it frustrates me not having the ease of access to knowledge of what's going on in the local politics and state level politics versus it's hard not to pay attention to what's going on federally. Like, you can't not know that Pelosi and McConnell are fighting over something. Everybody's going to hear about it. It's right in your face. And I'd like to see more of that in the discussion standpoint. But also, one of the things that I've been thinking about on it is it's the money goes that way too. There's more money. The federal government gets more money out of my paycheck. The state gets second and the local gets third. And this is one of those spitball ideas I've had that I don't know how long it would take me to sit down and break down the spreadsheet and do the whole thing. But to me, like, especially with the school systems needing more money, how much of my taxes are going to federal stuff that is not even needed, let alone not even spent near me, where my school system could use a good chunk of that. And I mean, I know not some comes back down federally and then gets respread around by counties through the state. But I mean, that's one of those things to me. And again, that's one of my big, ethereal, amorphous issues that I don't know how to really attack. But I'm always curious about that, because I mean, it's always money. That's always what we talk about, especially with the school systems. And I'm not disagreeing that more money spent on the kids should deliver better, and it stands to reason. But I would like to see not buying another fighter jet in the middle of a pandemic and not taking that money out of my paycheck anyway and keeping it here in the first place. That's one of the big things for me, is how much we federally spend and how much that comes out of my wallet in lieu of, because it's like a lot of these things that we talk about, especially when I talk to Democrats about it, because that's part of the platform and it's okay. But there's a lot of these things that we talk about where it's like, well, the general Republican answer is we don't have money for it. And the general Democrat answer is we want to do it. We'll figure out how to get the money. And it's like, well, I want to get it done, but why don't we have money for it? And where's all this other money going? And those kind of things are ones that bother me personally. But this has been fun. This has been way fun. I usually don't get into my libertarian and get attacked as a libertarian, and it was great.
Oh no, I'm not attacking you at all. Here's the thing I want to tell you. I really have respect for different ways of knowing things, and I love, my grandfather was a diehard Republican. My grandmother was a Union card carrying Democrat, right? So I grew up here in Tennessee hearing those discussions as part of my life, literally, regularly. And it was always, to me, they were heated sometimes or passionate discussions, but it was always interesting to see that there was some way of resolve. They found ways to resolve. Sometimes there was I have to walk away. There's no way I can agree with any of this, but oftentimes they were able to find common ground. And I love thinking about the different ways that people look at the structure of our political system.
Right.
Like I find it very intriguing, and I'm very stimulated by conversations with people who are not inside my bubble.
Right.
You know, I'm actually.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's one of those things that are lacking. And AC, one of the co-hosts of the main show, I quote him on this all the time, and I wish he worded it better because it's not the greatest, and I paraphrase it terribly on top of it. But essentially, you know, there's a reason there's a right and a left, and there's a reason there's a right and a wrong. And that, especially now, and especially like you've been talking a couple times on here, it's like, well, the Democrat wrote it, so no. And that's the right or wrong. You're not on my team, so no. And, you know, then I get to stand out as the libertarian and go, well, both teams think I'm wrong. And not necessarily, and I get the joy of saying, well, like, I mean, I think both of you guys are wrong on most things too, but at least I could see a middle ground. And I think that's one of those things that's lacking in the political sphere, is that it doesn't matter, because, you know, we could write the same exact bill, but if it has an R on it, I'm saying no, or it has a D on it, I'm saying yes. It doesn't matter. Like, you know, what was it? Tulsi Gabbard, I was a big fan of hers. I liked her on the Democratic primary, and she was talking about how when she was a freshman senator, she went in there and the aides and whatever took her into the Democrats' room, and that's all she was supposed to talk to. And she's like, this is dumb. Why am I only talking to these people? That doesn't make any sense, because these people are going to agree with me by default. I don't need to convince them anything. I need to go talk to these guys and see if these guys over here have any common ground that we can work with. And that premise being abnormal is the grossest thing about what's going on right now.
And I agree with you. And I certainly wasn't arguing with you, more than just saying, I hear what you're saying. I hear your desires and your wishes. But it has, you know, this is where we started the show, right? Where I was saying, I want to talk about things, not idealism. This is, you know, not knowing that you are a libertarian at all. So please don't misinterpret this. But saying, you know, we got to get out of the clouds. Like, we can't just have idealistic dreams. Wishes do not make dreams come true. You know,
yeah.
You have to have tangible ways to answer these questions and to solve these problems, and we depend on the government for at least some of that. And so it's always good to have. So when I challenge you, I'm just simply asking you to.
I'm more than happy about it.
And help us to help you to reach some of the goals that you would like to see happen by, you know, let's talk about this. And I'm always down. Listen, if after the 6th and I'm still in this race, you call me, we'll do this again.
Oh, well, either way, I'm not wishing you the worst, but either way, I want to talk to you more, because I've said this to everybody. Anybody, I definitely want to talk to you more if you win, because I want to give you more time to talk and then go into your direct on the general ballot. But I want to know more about the process. And like what it takes, like, you know, just the paperwork and the silly little intricacies of the system. One of the big ones for me, as soon as we get through this week, I'm going to start pushing to try to get some of the election commissioners in here. I want to understand like how some of these things work. Why, as an independent, do I not have options? Why don't we have a libertarian party that can do anything in the state of Tennessee? Why are these things the way they are? What can we do to fix them? These kind of things are very interesting to me, just as much as who you are and what you're going to do when you take the seat. Both of those things are very important to me, and I think they're very important to our audience in the sense that they don't know how these things work either. You know, like I was joking with Sam Brown on the one earlier. I was like, if you put on the ballot, if you put term limits, if you put redistricting in a more logical sense, and, you know, like cuts to salaries of senators and stuff like that, if you put that on the ballot, 98%, you know, 98% they're going to get voted in. Term limits will get voted in. Reduction of salary from senators will get voted in. And, you know, fixing districts will get voted in. But the people who actually get to vote on those things are the people that directly affects them, because that's their job. And they're like, well, no, I'm not going to vote myself a pay cut. No, I'm not going to vote myself out of the ability to restructure a district to make sure I keep my job. No, I'm not going to vote myself out of the ability to keep this job for 20, 40, 50 years, whatever it is. Of course not. And so, like, how those things are allowed to continue, especially in a more informed populace, in the sense that there's the ability to get information is easier. It's not super easy, but it's easier than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we didn't have access to the internet, when we didn't have brilliant podcasts like mine, getting this information out to people, you know. Those are the things to me. Like, I think that's the more effectual difference in the long term to me than the individual. Not to play down all the different individuals that are doing what they're doing right now, but getting a clear understanding of the system to the people so that they know what's happening to them by the people that are running for these different offices. And so that's my thing. So absolutely, I want to have you on again, win or lose, because I want to know some of the other side of it. That's not as much fun to talk to, especially when we're running into an election here in 3 days.
I'm happy. I'm an open book. I love talking about this stuff. And I'll tell you that I actually am with you on term limits. I'd be happy to vote.
Well, see, I'm not.
If I were in office.
See, I say it on there, but I'm not. That's one of my things. That's one of my things that I lose argument all the time on, because I think it's my responsibility, and I think that's my responsibility of a voter that I've failed. I've failed in that responsibility, in that I am letting people continue to keep office that aren't doing good work. Because to me, like, to me, for you, for example, let's say you get in there and you do these things, and I'm super pleased with it, and 6 years, 8 years down the road, you've hit your term limit and you can't go back. And it's like, well, no, she's doing great work. I want her to stay in there and do more great work. Well, there are term limits. It's like, no. And it should be the opposite too. It's like, this person keeps voting on things that I totally disagree with. This person, even though they hit the party right, they're not doing their job right, and I don't like it. I want them out of there. That's my job to vote on that. And, if it's lazy constituents and it's lazy voters and it's their fault, well, then it's their fault. And we need to figure out how to invigorate the populace to vote better, to get out there and not just be okay with, a 15-term senator. I was joking about it with Sam too. I was like, Joe Biden would still be in Congress if he didn't get that vice president. He was in Congress since the 70s or something like that, and he only retired from Congress so that he could be the vice president, and then he took a little break, and now he's trying to be the president. It's like, this guy has been federally office forever. If he was doing,
you look at the reality, though, that we have these career politicians, and I think it's one of the things that Senator Massey, that I find that in order to keep her job, she's really just not really done a lot,
right?
And so if you don't do much, you're much more likely to be able to keep that retirement plan of staying in these jobs. Right. And I think one place that's really clear is you see what's happening where Lamar Alexander's stepping down, and we just got this mad dash to the finish. You've got all these people both.
I've got my sample ballot over here. It's like 15 on the Republican side.
It's crazy, right? Whereas so many people want that job because it's a lifer, once you get it.
Right. Worst case scenario, you upgrade to a vice president or something like that. Apparently, worst case scenario, you go higher, is what it seems like.
And I will tell you that in state positions, and you can look it up, and states are different from state to state. And in some states, being a senator, they don't get paid at all.
Right.
Which means that in order to be a senator, you have to be wealthy. You can't, because you don't go and be a senator and have government aid. If you have a real job, you can't be a senator if you don't get paid. So I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that. I don't think it should necessarily just be a voluntary position, because people have to be able to. So that means only the wealthy could do it.
Right. Well, no, I'm not advocating for
and in
complete
Tennessee,
pay
just
cut.
so you know, a senator makes around $26,000 a year. So nobody's getting rich as a senator, and House of Representatives.
You're also only working 4 months a year.
You're in session 4 months a year,
right.
but you still hold
right.
offices.
Right.
Yeah, year round. Yeah, but you're in Nashville. Yeah, that's true. But it's been interesting this year because they took that break in March. They came back in June, and now it looks like they're going to come back in August for another short session. We'll be really curious to see what happens.
Right.
Here just in a few days after the election, and they come back together because it's interesting that they would choose to do that after the elections, and what is their goal and how are they trying to affect things. I think that they see the blue wave is a real possibility in the state of Tennessee. And so it's more like what are the meetings called when you sit down with the generals and the armies? What do they call those meetings?
Oh, I don't really,
in the war room.
Yeah. The Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah, your Joint Chiefs of Staff. I have a feeling it may be more of that than really getting together to try to solve anything for us.
Right.
I do want to just answer something about the schools, though, in your talk about kids going back to school. And this just comes from my academic training, which is, we see that whenever you have a surge, your goal is to separate and isolate so that surge can start to come down. It's really to not overwhelm the system. We also, to not overwhelm the system, would prefer that people are wearing their masks. Excuse me.
I'm in my own house, but I've got mine handy too.
Yep, there's yours. Yep. That people are wearing their masks, not because it protects them, but because it protects those people that they're with. And even then, it's not 100%, and we've known that from the beginning. Nobody ever said it did. but it certainly does make a difference. And if we can get the surge to come down, we're able to maintain things that our hospitals are not overwhelmed, then we're going to have another surge. There's no doubt about it. It's not just going to disappear.
Right.
But the goal would be that the second one is shorter than the first one, and that the third one is less, and that the fourth one is less, and that there's more time between each of these peaks. That's what we would like to see, for people to give kind of a general understanding. We're still surging here in Tennessee because we haven't really taken the precautions necessary. When they determined what they were going to reopen, the things that they reopened, gyms and bars and restaurants, those are in the most dangerous. They're in the red zones, right? Things are parsed out by color. And so we opened things. Again, Becky Massey sat down in a tweet. She sent out, having meetings to figure out how we're going to reopen. And every person on our list was a business owner, right? When we had in the Knox County schools, they selected a board of people. Each school board member was able to choose someone to sit on that board to look at how we should reopen our schools. And my opponent happens to be, Sam Brown was actually chosen to be that person. He's not an educator. He's not a physician. He's not an epidemiologist. He doesn't even have kids. But for political reasons, he was chosen to go on that committee. And this is what happened across the committee. There were no physicians, no epidemiologists, no school administrators. There was no one on that board making those decisions. So, that's where we choose politics over caring for our own children. Excuse me.
See, and now me, I've been talking all day, and I've been talking all day, and I haven't been choked up yet. But this is a long one for me because I've got Virginia Couch coming in here in a little bit, and then following Virginia Couch, I have a Zoom meeting for Cub Scouts moving into the school year and got to figure out that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, my point is that we haven't structured getting kids back into school in a way that's appropriate. At the local level, we chose people to be part of a committee for political reasons and not because they were the right people to make the decisions.
Right.
We chose reopening our cities based on and establishments based on what the businesses wanted. Once again, not consulting those who really could inform us how it would be safe. And then we've got a governor who just wants everything open. He doesn't really care, how it impacts people, which is unfortunate because people will die because of those decisions. So the reality is that I think what's going to happen with the schools is that we may get the doors open and we may be open for a few days and we may be open for a couple of weeks, but I don't think it'll be much longer than 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
Schools are going to have to close.
Yeah, that is a concern.
For every teacher that's exposed and has to go home and quarantine. And they're only, by the way, giving them 10 days instead of 14,
Yep.
which is absurd because, I mean, my gosh, it says 14-day quarantine. Why are you doing 10? Anyway,
well, you got weekends on both sides and one in the middle, theoretically. Yeah. But even in that, if there's
if you get sick on Tuesday, yeah. And then the reality is that we've got a couple of things going on, but one is that Governor Lee announced last week that, and I've got it, it's on my Facebook if you want to look at it. His quote. He said that they're not going to require the schools to make any formal reports of any COVID-19 outbreaks amongst the staff, the teachers, or the children. What?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Like, are you kidding me? And they said we will not be informing communities if there are outbreaks within their schools. What? I don't get this.
I think it'll naturally get out. I think it'll naturally get out whether he wants it to or not. I mean, there's no way that you're going to keep enough parents quiet that their Facebook pages aren't blowing up with the fact that, their kids are out of school again and there was an outbreak at the school or whatever. But It is kind of strange, just for data collection points. I mean, data is important to what's going on right now.
Oh, it absolutely is. So my point is just here that I think that there's a good chance that we still haven't found the rhythm to be able to get into that stepwise movement of our surges and time in between. So the consequence to that is going to show up in our schools, just like in Nashville. They're going back to phase 2. They're shutting down the bars. They have to go. They're working backwards, which makes this a much more protracted experience than it has to be for business owners. Like if you just did it, let's just shut it down. Let's get it over with. And then of course, there could be in 6 weeks another chance where we have to shut down for another week or 2, right? Well, we don't know. We just don't know. There's so much we don't know. We don't know how this is going to impact the kids. Kids have been in isolation for the most part, so we don't really know how they're affected by the virus. There's a study that came out last week showing that kids have 60 to 100 times the viral load that adults do when they're tested with nasal swabs. Now, I'm not saying that has anything to do with transmission because we don't know the answer to that yet. So I'm not even implying that because I don't like bad science and I don't like leaning into numbers to pretend like they mean something they don't. But what we do know is that they're carrying pretty heavy viral loads, and how is that going to impact? We don't know.
Right, and I mean, right, and for me, there is risk, obviously, but for our social circles and stuff like that, for the majority of the people that I and my kids interact with on a day-to-day basis, the threat is less, not none, and that's one of the reasons why we chose go back to school. But you're probably right. I would not be surprised if we get a couple weeks in. And I was joking with my wife. I was like, maybe we'll buy an RV and just drive.
Yeah.
Just drive. Know, right? There's a guy around here doing that, apparently. There's a news story about it. You know,
I have a parent who did that. She just took her 4 kids and they all went down to the beach and they stayed in a house that they stay in. That belongs to a friend, you know, that nobody else is there, but they were the friends. The friends left and they had the house. So they just went for 6 weeks in the quarantine with their kids and lived on the beach. Why not? You know?
Well, I had the misfortune of not getting laid off, so I didn't have that as an option. But you know, for me, like, again, like, what probably the biggest thing in the history of my dabblings into libertarianism that made me question my libertarianism is this mask mandate. I feel like as a libertarian, I hate it. I hate every ounce of the idea of it. But as a citizen of this county and walking around and just the vitriol that goes along with people that are anti-maskers, I understand that you don't like it and they're annoying. That's fine. But the amount of people that truly are like, no, this is the man trying to keep me down kind of thing. It's like, oh, I hate that. Because as a libertarian, we should act, not should be made to act. And that's what drives me crazy. We should act in the community's best interest. That should be natural. And it breaks my soul that it's not natural. And that's what drives me nuts. All right, we went way long.
Yeah, people don't have any problem wearing pants and underwear when they go to the grocery store.
I mean, I do, but that's a whole separate thing.
Well, the bottom line is, you know, there are times, you know, we had to say, no, you can't smoke inside bars anymore because, you know, you're hurting people. And so you may think you have a right to do that, but you don't. You don't have a right to impose that on others. And this is a public health issue where we know people that are affected, that are asymptomatic. And listen, your highest viral loads, so far, they're showing that your highest viral loads are 2 days before symptoms, 2 days before.
Right.
So you don't even know you're sick.
Right.
And that's where your highest viral loads are. So
you're walking around spreading it. Right.
It's, you know, let's get this over with. Let's get our masks on. Let's get it over with. Let's try to get life back. It's never going to be normal. I mean, COVID's it's not going away, right?
Right.
It doesn't just disappear, just like the flu doesn't just disappear. But that we can find ways to move it through over time where it'll have less of an impact. And then there's the, you know, the potential for either treatment or a vaccine. I mean, we'll see how that goes.
Right. All right. We went way long, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
We did.
You're the only one that expressed any concern about how long we could go, and you are therefore the one that goes the longest. That's the way the world works, and I love it. So give your contact. How do people get in touch with you? How do people learn more about you? Because they've only got a few days to make a choice if they are registered as such. So August 6th, go out, and if you need more information, find it.
www.votejanegeorge.com. Votejanegeorge.com. That's my website. There you can visit the issues. You can sign up for our newsletter. If you are lining up with us in our issues, then please help us and support us. We do have a donation button. And you can also just sign up for our newsletter just to kind of see where we're going and what we're doing. If we go past the 6th, we're going to need to do some real organizing to run against this in this David and Goliath type race. You can also follow me on Twitter. It's Vote Jane George and the number 1. And you can find me on Facebook, Jane George Tian for Tennessee, Senator, District 6.
The wonderful long Facebook ones. Yes.
Yeah, I know.
I'll pull it off here. I'll pull a link of it and I'll put the link in the notes for everybody as well. So that was fantastic. I've got a quick outro to do, and then we'll let you go on your merry little way.
All right.
Woohoo, guys. That was a great episode. Jane George, Senate seat, District 6. Vote Jane George. VoteJaneGeorge.com. I'll put a link into that in the notes, like I said. We are almost in agreement at gmail.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, and any podcast provider that you can think of, we should be on there. If we're not, shoot us an email and I'll figure out how to get on there for you, because if you have a preference in podcast providers, I'm more than willing to do my best to acquiesce. So thank you, guys. I got a little bit of break for me, and then I'm coming back with Virginia Couch, and that is us for this episode. Thanks, everybody.